a war ends only when all participants lay down their arms. If so, World War II lasted for almost 30 years after the signing of the peace treaty. This is what happened to the Japanese soldiers and officers who stayed in the jungle and could not believe that it was already over, all because they had been warned during training that the enemy would try to misinform the guerrilla units. The most stubborn soldier was Onoda Hiroo. Onoda Hiroo was born on March 19, 1922 in Wakayama in central Japan. In 1940, upon reaching the age of 18, Onoda joined the Imperial Army of Japan and quickly underwent specialized intelligence training. He was sent to a training facility in Tokyo that specialized in training elite special forces units. Hiroo's military training was unique, as the school taught him unconventional ways of warfare, including guerrilla warfare, sabotage, counterintelligence, and propaganda. The skills Onoda learned came in handy when he was sent to the island of Lubang in the Philippines after graduation in December 1944. 2 years earlier, the Imperial Army of Japan had invaded the Philippines, wresting control from the Philippine government and American troops stationed in the country. Their army was fragmented, however, and when the US launched a counteroffensive against the island nation in early 1944, it quickly began to close in on the Japanese. By the winter of 1944, many Japanese troops had been pushed off the larger islands of the Philippines and retreated to smaller islands in the Philippine archipelago, such as Lubang Island. Onoda, trained in guerrilla warfare tactics, was sent to this small island on December 26, 1944, to use his special skills to hold off American and Filipino troops for as long as possible. Thus, Onoda utilized a technique tried and tested by the Japanese, whereby when their outposts were close to defeat in conventional warfare, they would retreat into the forests and launch guerrilla attacks. The goal was to prevent American troops from gaining a firm foothold in the region, delay their advance toward Japan, and give the Imperial Japanese Army more time to regroup and prepare for attacks. These guerrilla units, also acting as guerrillas, were to continue to be a thorn in the side of the Allies. However, when Hiroo Onoda arrived on the island, officers above Onoda in rank prevented him from completing the mission, preferring instead to fight the invasion troops head-on. As a result, when American troops landed on the small island on February 28, 1945, Japanese troops attempted to fight them and were quickly defeated. Onoda's commander, Major Taniguchi Yoshimi, ordered Onoda and his 3 last remaining men, Corporal Shimada Shoichi, Private Akatsu Yuichi, and Private First Class Kinshichi Kozuka, to stand and fight, never to surrender. The order was given according to the Senjin-kun military code, which forbade retreat and surrender. Onoda, then 23 years old, obeyed the major's order and retreated into the jungle. They considered all information that the war was over as propaganda. On September 2nd, 1945, Japan signed the Surrender Act. By this time, American fighting on the island had virtually ceased, but Onoda was convinced that the enemy still controlled Lubang. Toward the end of the year, a Boeing flew over the mountain where Onoda's unit was hiding. It dropped leaflets announcing the surrender of General Yamashita Tomoyuki, who had commanded the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. The guerrillas discussed this and concluded that the leaflet was enemy propaganda trying to get them to surrender, so they continued to hide and fight. Onoda and his 3 men hid in the jungle, waging guerrilla warfare against the civilian population of Lubang, the local police, and several Filipino and American search parties who were looking for them. Onoda and his comrades assumed that The search was being conducted by Japanese prisoners who were being forced against their will. To avoid starvation, the soldiers subsisted on banana peels, coconuts, and rice stolen from local farmers. A few years later, in 1950, the Korean War broke out. Onoda heard jets flying overhead. He assumed it was a Japanese counteroffensive, despite what newspapers also circulating on the island claimed, which Onoda called another Yankee propaganda. One of Onoda's fellow soldiers, Akatsu Yuichi, suspected more and more each day that the war might be over after all. He separated from the group in 1949, and after spending 6 months alone in the jungle, surrendered to Philippine authorities in 1950. Akatsu was able to provide the Filipinos with information about his comrades. This led to letters and family photos of the rest of the group being dropped from an airplane into the jungle in 1952 to force the soldiers to surrender. Onoda ignored this, believing the letters and photos to be another forgery. In 1953, police officers wounded Onoda's comrade Shimada Shoichi during a raid on a fishing village, and a year later, a search party sent to find the soldiers hiding in the jungle shot Art and killed him. After that, Onoda and his remaining comrade, Kazuka Kinshichi, spent most of their time in underground caves, gathering intelligence on military installations and enemy movements and engaging in periodic skirmishes with locals. Over the years, they killed 30 islanders after mistaking them for enemy soldiers, and each time they managed to evade the police. Onoda and Kazuka built bamboo huts and somehow kept their weapons and uniforms in good condition. They continued to believe that any information they received about Japan and their families was the result of American propaganda threatening their loved ones. In Lubanga, stories spread about a mythical soldier who hides on the outskirts of the village and harms those who approach him. One local leader, Ben Abeleda, said that many farmers refused to cultivate their farms near the highlands because they feared he would shoot them. Onoda's surrender process? In 1959, the Japanese government officially declared Onoda Hiru dead, and on October 19, 1972, Onoda's comrade Kazuka Kinshichi was shot dead on Lubang Island, whose body was identified and returned to his homeland. This led to renewed speculation in the Japanese media about his fate, with people believing that perhaps Onoda might still be alive. In 1974, explorer Suzuki Norio decided to embark on a journey to find Lieutenant Onoda. Strangely, despite an unsuccessful 3-decade search for Onoda by local authorities, it took Suzuki only 4 days to meet the lurking Japanese soldier. Onoda later recounted that at first he wanted to shoot the stranger, but Suzuki's statement, "Onoda-san, the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you," made him hesitate. Onoda explained to Suzuki that he would not leave until he received an official order. He agreed to wait for Suzuki to return with his commander. Promising to find Onoda's commander, Suzuki returned to Japan with photographs confirming their meeting. The authorities helped track down Major Taniguchi Yoshimi, the same man who had ordered Onoda and his group not to surrender. By then, he had retired from his book-selling business, but agreed to return to Lubang with Suzuki. On March 9, 1974, Major Taniguchi personally rescinded his original order, relieving Onoda of his duties. A stunned Onoda cried and surrendered as a prisoner. He had with him a sword, a rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, several hand grenades, and a dagger his mother had given him before he was sent into service. Onoda later presented his sword to Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, from whom he received a pardon. Onoda and his subordinates carried out numerous raids, victimizing Filipino and American soldiers and locals. He and his associates killed about 30 people and wounded nearly 100. Under Philippine law, Onoda faced the death penalty. However, the country's president, Ferdinand Marcos, after negotiations with the Japanese Foreign Ministry, exonerated Onoda, returned his personal weapons, and even praised his loyalty to military duty. Onoda Hiru returned to Tokyo on a chartered, hired for transportation plane of Japan Airlines. He was greeted by parents, jubilant, flag-waving crowds, front-page headlines, and incessant media coverage. Onoda's decades of deprivation and his commitment to a hopeless mission seemed to have touched a nerve in a nation that was contemplating a focus on materialism and capitalism. On his return to Tokyo, Onoda openly showed emotion only once, when at the airport he met the weeping daughter of his former comrade Shimada Shoichi, who had died 20 years earlier. The daughter was carrying a large photograph of her father. Onoda lost his rigid composure for a moment, became somber, and bowed several times. That same year, 1974, Onoda wrote an account of his ordeal entitled No Surrender, My 30 Years War, which became a national bestseller. Onoda struggled to adjust to fame and life in modern Japan, and to what he perceived as an erosion of traditional Japanese values in a population that no longer held zealous loyalty to the emperor. A year after his return, he followed his older brother's example and moved to the Japanese colony of São Paulo in Brazil in April 1975. Onoda was never able to settle into the modern country, which had become a concrete jungle during his absence, and despite being honored as a hero in his homeland, Onoda followed his older brother's example and moved to the Japanese colony of São Paulo in Brazil in April 1975. There he was engaged in animal husbandry, and in 1976 he married a Japanese woman. The couple subsequently spent time in both Brazil and Japan. Although Onoda received a military pension from the cabinet for his return, he refused additional gratuities from the Japanese government, as well as any private donations. The money he received but was unable to return was donated to the Yasukuni Shrine, a Shinto memorial dedicated to Japanese who died in service to their country. The memorial contains lists of the names of 1,068 people convicted of World War II war crimes, as well as the names of those who died in the wars. A number of Asian countries, including China and South Korea, have expressed outrage at the existence of the shrine, as they believe that Yasukuni is an attempt to glorify Japanese aggression and atrocities during World War II. Even within Japan itself, the shrine has drawn mixed reactions, with some heads of government refusing to visit the memorial. Onoda remained a staunch militarist, committed to the revisionist views that are fundamental to Yasukuni Shrine and Japanese conservatism. Onoda died of complications from pneumonia at the age of 91 on January 16th, 2014. But even after his death, his memory lives on, with many people on social media referring to him as the last samurai.